great.
Okay. Well, I've titled this fourth talk, Obscure Chart. Just in that, I wanted to share some of the things that, for me, seem a little bit mysterious about the place, some unanswered questions. It's one of the things I really have loved about delving into Chartres Cathedral. There's still so much to learn about it, more than I will ever have time to explore or research. But it's been a wonderful way to it's just been great. You know, with my friend Rick Legault in Canada 3 years ago, we spent a few days in Chartres, and he was sharing with me some of the things that he was finding interesting, things I'd never noticed about Chartres. I tried to do the same with him. It was a very complimentary time together. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of some of the stuff that he's working on and some of the things that I'm looking into that are sort of open questions for me as we get into this. All righty. So this is a little bit of what seems obscure, some of the things that people may overlook, some of the things that are out of the way that people usually don't get to on tours, some of that. So anyhow, let's get started.
You can use
this. Okay. So for those of you who haven't been in one of these before, the Chartres is about 48 miles southwest of Paris, easily accessible by train, done it many times. It's a wonderful little ride, now more of a commuter ride than anything else. There's the cathedral, the west facade. It's mismatched towers. The one on the right, I think dating from the 1100s, the one on the left more in the 1400, 1500 range. And a lot below that was some of it done in the 1100s, some of the 1200s, and the cathedral itself was rebuilt after a fire in 1194. So tonight's topic, some open questions and mysteries. I'm going to mention Rick's insight into the disconnected zodiac. I'm going to mention my interest in circles and squares and mirrors, and then I'll offer a little obscurity sampler, some things that, you know, are, I think, curious, fun, and interesting, in that there are no firm answers about any of them, and why they're all the way they are the way they are. So starting with the disconnected zodiac, Rick's written a bunch of stuff about Chartres Cathedral, including a really fun article about its labyrinth and some of the other things there. But one of the things that he noticed and shared with me in 2019 was that one of the symbols for a zodiac sign, the Gemini, the twins on the right here, are disconnected from the rest of the zodiac, which appears in another doorway to the left of the west facade. And also you have here on the left, you see the feminine personification of logic, I believe. So at any rate, Rick's written a good paper about it. And one of the things that I want to say here is that there's a lot that we can't go into in great detail right now. And this is one of those things. But I'm going to pull together a reading list with links to Rick's articles, to my blog, to some essays that we've been working on, and share that with everybody so that you have it going forward. And if you want to learn more about Chartres and some of the things that people are speculating about, it'll be a good place to do it. One of my real long-standing interests in Chartres Cathedral is the juxtaposition of circles and squares there. One of the things that they mean, the two symbols mean, at least at a very basic level, is that the circle represents the heavens, divinity associated with God. The square, hearkening back to Aristotle and a philosopher named Empedocles, represents the earth with its four corners and so forth. And at Chartres, there's almost there's a very persistent theme. You see it in the stained glass, you see it in sculpture, you even see it in the juxtapositions of circles and squares in the two rows windows on the transepts on the arms of the cross. And one of the places that I spotted circles and squares with particular impact and significance is in the presentation by Jesus to Peter of the keys to the kingdom. And from that episode in the Gospels, the idea grew out that Peter was the first pope. So there's this church and pope symbolism here, Christ and God and pope symbolism. But at any rate, the circle and square here are interlinked at the handles up here. And I think that is significant. And I've written an article. I'm going to be, it's circulating now, but I will share this one with you. Maybe on my blog, it may be that something I send out with a theory about what the circles and squares imply at Chartres. And for me, it's been a lot of fun to do that research over the last year. And then there's another little theory that we've been thinking about. Rick and I have talked a little bit about it. It's very much in the early stages of development. But mirrors were a really big deal in the Middle Ages. There were hundreds of books written about the mirror of something, the mirror of history, the mirror of nature, a lot of mirror in the titles. And these were popular books. Blanche, the Queen of France, around the time that Chartres was being built, and reportedly one of the major donors at Chartres, had a Mirror of the Soul book written for her. So at any rate, it's one of those other things that I'm thinking about. And here, why mirror? Because alpha and omega mirror here omega and alpha across the two sides of the church. This may just be a clue that it really is something that's going on at Chartres and something that we're looking into. But at any rate, these are the reasons why I keep going back, why I keep studying, why I find it so fascinating and energizing. There's just so much there. One French author described cathedrals and Chartres in particular as some of France's pyramids, you know, and that they're the monuments. They're the big monuments in France that kind of epitomize the French nation. And for me, it's a nice little parallel because, you know, people are still trying to figure out what the pyramids meant. And we're still trying to figure out what Chartres Cathedral means. And we may never get to the bottom of it. A lot of stuff that we speculate about, we really can't prove because there's just no written record explaining why people did what they did with things like opposing alpha and omega windows. At any rate, it's just one of those things that'll, if you're into it, keep going with it. Rick, you in particular. So the three sampler topics are Boethius's ass, virtues and vices, and gargoyles and grotesques tonight. We're going to start with Boethius's ass. Mary K. Kuzner asked in an email, who is Boethius? Well, I mentioned him in the last talk as one of the guys who was really instrumental in transmitting from ancient Rome, from classical Rome to the Middle Ages, a lot of information and thinking about the seven liberal arts. And Boethius's ass is something that people named after he wrote a book called The Consolation of Philosophy. He wrote this book in 523, in the year before he was executed by the Ostrogothic king of Rome at the time. His name was Theodoric. Anyhow, Boethius's family had been a long-standing member of the Roman aristocracy. And when the Ostrogoths invaded and basically took over Rome, some of the aristocracy was working with the new rulers. And Boethius is one of them and became sort of a minister to the king. So this is when Rome was in decline. And Boethius, among other things, was really wanting to pass along classical learning to folks who came afterwards. So he had as one of his life tasks the idea that he would translate from Greek into Latin all of Aristotle's works. He never finished. He made it part way. He got several of them, and several of those Aristotelian treatises then were passed on into the Middle Ages. So at the time Chartres was being built, that's one of the things that they had about Aristotle before the rediscovery and the rewriting or the actual translation of most of Aristotle's works that I talked about last time. And a lot of that happened in Spain with the cooperation of Muslim scholars translating not from Greek to Latin, but from Arabic to Latin. So at any rate, Boethius was really an important transmitter, and his book, Consolation of Philosophy, was widely read, circulated in the monastic and cathedral schools. It went on to have a life in the universities, the early universities of the Middle Ages. And you'll see some references to it in Dante's Divine Comedy, the Inferno, and Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Chaucer, in fact, translated into an Old English form, the Consolation of Philosophy. So that book then it's a discussion between Boethius as he is facing execution, trying to figure out how he's really having a conversation with Lady Philosophy about the nature of good and evil, how God fits into all of this when somebody like him, a good man, is accused of treason. He was actually set up by some people who weren't his fans, and he was eventually executed by the state. He was facing all of that, knew that it was likely, and the discussion that he had with Lady Philosophy, one historian called the best prison literature that's ever been created. It really is very, I've not read all of it, I read parts of it, and his discussion with Lady Philosophy is very heartfelt and asking all of the questions that somebody might be asking before they die. How did it happen like this? How does God play into all of this? And it became a very popular book in the Middle Ages. And I should say, Merce, could you get it? I think it's over on the, or did I bring it over here? It's still in print, just in case anybody wants to. Yeah, I brought it along. Let's see here. There you go. One of the Penguin classics, The Consolation of Philosophy. Parts of it I've read, I found very enjoyable, and I plan to read it this year in part because it's not that thick. I can probably identify a little bit more with Boethius at this point in my life. So at any rate, let's move on. So in the book, there's this quick reference where Lady Philosophy asks Boethius while he's moping around about, his impending death. She asks, "Have my words penetrated your mind, or are you like the proverbial donkey, deaf to the lyre?" Okay, where's the proverb? We'll come to that. The little manuscript down below shows Boethius in prison. So we're going to be going outside Chartres Cathedral, around the corner from where we were looking at that wisdom and 7 liberal arts thing. So this is right around the corner under the tower, the old tower on the right side of the cathedral. There is Boethius's ass. We're going to look at some close-up photos. In French, they say it's also known as l'âne qui vielle or l'âne à la lyre. So loosely translated, which is the best I can do, it means the donkey or the ass of the vielle, which is sort of a hurdy-gurdy stringed instrument, something you can turn and it plays, or the ass of the lyre. So we're going to stick with Boethius's ass and think about that lyre. So there on the left, you have the donkey holding what's left of the lyre, and on the right, the guys who are holding him up. Well,
let's see that again.
Okay.
A little bit longer.
All right.
Okay.
Ready?
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I want to give you a little bit of context for this before we talk a little bit more about this Boethius's ass. It was a popular image at the time, and it showed up in this mural painting of a dragon up above. This was in a monastery in Spain near Burgos. The monastery was abandoned in 1841, but I'm going to direct you to the little line, the register below the dragon. The dragon certainly captures my attention. And I'll mention that this is visible, quite visible, here on the North American continent in New York. It appears at the Cloisters Museum, where they basically took a fresco from this monastery in Spain and use a process to transfer that fresco onto canvas. So what you see here is that image on canvas, and we're going to look down below. Well, there you have the donkey playing the lyre with a jackal, with a bull, and with a guy probably thinking, what the heck is that noise? There's the donkey in greater detail. Okay, why and where did this come from? And this is one of the things about this donkey and lyre that really intrigues me. This notion of a donkey playing a lyre and the idea that you've got this ignorant beast, it was popular among the Greeks, the image of a donkey and lyre, and the donkey just never really quite got it. We'll learn more about that in just a little bit. But let's think a little bit further back about where this might have come from. Well, here's an image of a bull-headed lyre of Now, I hope sounds familiar to those of you who have read your Old Testament. This is of the Chaldees. This is where Abraham started out. This particular lyre was found in a tomb and reconstructed in the 1930s, I believe. It's a bull-faced thing above. The sounding board is below with the strings behind. But look at what you see on the sounding board. A donkey playing a lyre, a bear holding up the lyre, and a jackal playing a flute over here, and a bull. So you have a bunch of animals that are evidently symbolic to the people who made this. These are the Babylonians who made it in the year around 2500 BCE. So this image jumped through the centuries, through the millennia, from 2500 BCE to 1200 Chartres, and also to this abbey in Spain and other places in Europe, as a very popular image of something that just seems pretty absurd. There's also an illumination, and this is from the 1300s, the donkey playing the viol. This is, I think, the hurdy-gurdy instrument with the monkey doing a dance, like an organ grinder's monkey would, and maybe presenting him with money. I can't tell what this thing is. It looks like I really don't know what the monkey's holding, but it's there. And again, the ass doing something that's completely out of character. And then, around the same time, a monk in England wrote a book called The Mirror of Fools. Well, the donkey in this Mirror of Fools was named Brunel, or Brunellus for Brown. And Brunellus had this idea that he could go to the university, he could become a bishop. He wanted to do all of the things that, his limitations just prevented him from doing. And that's kind of the message of the donkey and the lyre. The proverb that is involved with this is a Greek proverb. When Lady Philosophy referred to the proverbial donkey, it's around this idea. The donkey walks out into a meadow and finds a lyre, a stringed instrument, just sitting out there. and starts to strum it with his hoofs. Well, he doesn't do very well, and the music is rather, well, unpleasant. And the donkey laments that, oh my goodness, I'm just so ignorant about this. It's too bad that a wise man didn't find this thing in the first place and play something that would really please the ears of the gods. So this notion that the donkey was ignorant in the sense that he wanted to be something he couldn't be played out. And the satire, and folks apparently in the Middle Ages were really fond of this kind of satire. It was not lost on them. They found in this Brunellus thing an allegory for the clergy and for some of the students who were going to the university, people who wanted to be a little bit smarter than they really could be, people who wanted more authority than they could really be. So this Mirror of Fools is really a big satire of the church hierarchy and some of the monasteries. So at any rate, there's this association between Boethius's ass and Proverbs about wanting to be more than you can be, going beyond your natural limitations, expecting to be something you can't be, that carries through like a theme from the Greeks into the Middle Ages with the Boethius's ass at Chartres. So it's just one of those things that fascinating. I can't explain how the images themselves of a donkey playing a lyre made the jump from Mesopotamia 2,500 years before Christ to 1200 AD when, or 1200 BC, the Common Era, CE, the Common Era, when Chartres was being built. It's, again, one of the mysteries of how this all played out, something to study, something that I hope people at some point can sort out and tell us a little bit more.
Hey, Mike, can you take a couple of questions?
Yep.
Okay. Dominique wants to know, do you know if the donkey and the lyre is found in earlier than Chartres Roman churches?
I know of one other place in France, Dominique, but I don't know if it's earlier. I'll take a look back at that and let everybody know. Good question.
And Craig wants to know, where can one find the illumination of the something lyre that you showed a few slides ago?
This one?
And you might want to look at the chat. Yeah, perhaps. Craig, can you chime in?
This one's at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles.
Getty?
No, what book?
I don't know which manuscript, but I can find that too. I have that footnote at home.
Amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Carrie, anything else?
Nope, that's all for now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on. Virtues and vices.
You know what, Mike?
Yeah.
Mike, I apologize. One more thing coming in from Jerry and Ruth. In Exodus, the ass sees the angels of the Lord and tells the priest/seer to curse the Israelites as they sojourn through the Moabite kingdom en route to their promised land, and then speaks to the priest.
Jerry and Ruth, thank you for raising that. I in another talk, I've mentioned this one or something about it, and it's an important point. The Greeks came to think of the donkey as an ignorant animal. And some historians think that happened when the Greeks began to use the horse. That the donkey became, well, you know, second rate. But before that, and certainly in Mesopotamia and in other faith traditions, the donkey was sacred in some religious traditions. And there's the story of Balaam's ass in, I think, the book of Genesis, or maybe it's Exodus, I can't remember which, where Balaam is going along the way and is rather arrogant and kind of beating up on his donkey. And the donkey just stops in the road. And Balaam beats it a little bit more and says, "Why aren't you moving?" Well, the donkey then says, "Well, it's because there's an angel in the middle of the road blocking us, and you probably better talk to the angel." Words to that effect. So at any rate, there's this parallel, there are these parallel views about the donkey and its meaning. One ignorant, one sacred. And there were different among the folks in the Middle East and in Jewish tradition, a little bit of conflict between the Greek view and the Middle Eastern view about what the donkey meant. So all of this about the donkey and the lyre is, again, just interesting to study because it comes from a lot of different traditions. And what we see at Chartres, maybe pulling all of that stuff together, the mirror of fools, Boethius's ass, Greek proverbs. I'm just not sure how it all meshed, but it's there and makes it interesting. All set? Okay. All right. I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the virtues and vices that are on display at Chartres Cathedral. I'm bringing this into the talk about obscure Chartres in part because these things are tucked away in a little corner, or a place that folks don't usually go to, and a place that the tour guides usually don't take people because there's so much else to talk about. But I think it's just kind of interesting to see how these things, these ideas about wisdom and how virtue plays into wisdom, leading a happy life, leading an ethical and godly life, how it kind of plays together and where the sources for this stuff are. So since Chartres is a Roman Catholic Christian cathedral, it is no doubt influenced by St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians and some things that Pope Gregory and St. Ambrose wrote about the 7 cardinal and theological virtues. The cardinal virtues, according to Gregory, are prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. The theological virtues come directly from Corinthians: faith, hope, and love, also called charity. Now, there was another book that was very popular in the Middle Ages and circulated in all of those schools we've talked about already, a book called the Psychomachia. And the word essentially means battle of the soul or battle in the soul. And it's written about as an allegory, again, like many things were at that time in the late Roman Empire, as an allegory about the tension and the conflict between the virtues and the vices. And this book also became a source for some of the iconography that's at Chartres and at other places. And then finally, around the same time that Chartres was being built, well, really just a little bit before, in the mid 1100s, a cleric in Toledo in Spain, working with a translator, there was a major center for translating from Greek and Arabic into Latin going on in Toledo in Spain at that time. His name was Gregory of Cremona, and he translated Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics with their 12 moral virtues, which included things like, well, I'm going to just scroll down a little bit: courage, temperance, truthfulness, wittiness, modesty, among others. So we're not going to look at all of them at Chartres Cathedral, but these are some of the sources and influences for the art that's there around the virtues and vices. And the way, here we go, another little diagram. We're going to the south porch. It's also right next to it is the Last Judgment, and there are a lot of sculpture of saints and churchmen on this portal. But one of the things kind of on the side are these images of the virtues and vices, and they're often paired. So here you see charity and avarice. Well, charity is shown giving some clothing to a poor person who's there, a little guy on her right. Charity, that notion of charitable giving and taking care of the poor, this picks up on a story about Saint Martin of Tours, Saint Martin and the beggar, where Saint Martin, riding along on his horse, saw a beggar at the gate of the city and cut his cloak in half and gave it to the beggar. And that became a very common theme in the art of at Chartres. There are stained glass windows dedicated to that story, as well as sculpture a little bit further down on the right of that porch we just saw. Well, avarice or greed is there also, and we'll talk a little bit about her as we go. So here's the close-up of Charity. Her emblem is a sheep. And the idea is that the sheep gives us wool and the wool gives us warmth. So it's the substance of clothing. And most of the allegorical female personifications of these virtues have this kind of shield with a little emblem on it. Down below, avarice, she's lost a lot of her detail. But the idea here is that she's caressing rather fondly her treasure chest on her right. And she is quite smitten with that treasure chest. And also the people who write the guidebooks about this say, and by the way, she's not wearing rags. You can see that she's wearing some very nice, tailored clothing here. Next one, chastity and lechery. Well, I just like some of these things are fun just for what they show about the vices, to tell you the truth. Chastity here is shown with a phoenix, which according to legend is an asexual creature who, rises again, is reborn, not through procreation and such, but through those famous flames. So at any rate, there's a little allusion here to chastity being above all of the regenerative things that humans normally engage in, but not below. Here we have the images or the notion of lechery, 1220 style. And this is a guy who's holding a purse. You can't see it here very well, but it's kind of embedded in his clothing. He's pulling his purse out to pay the woman on the left for her sexual favors. At one point here, she was holding a mirror, which also brought in the whole idea of vanity into all of this. But the lecher here is paying money to have sex, and that was frowned upon then, as in some circles it is now. All right, another one, humility, and that she's shown with a dove. She's paired with pride, and here you have a young horse rider falling from his horse, and there's a nice little guidebook written in French called Chartres Revealed, Chartres Révélé, where they give a few little notes about these things. And I'm paraphrasing here, but it said, in thinking that he can dominate the animal, his pretensions cause him to lose control. And that may very well be the essence of pride. Okay. Carrie, any, I don't have a lot more images on these virtues and vices, but they're fun to look at. If you get to Chartres, by all means, take a look at that little spot on the south porch and you'll see more of them. Carrie, any questions about the virtues and vices?
A lot of really wonderful, insightful comments. So let me scroll up and share those with you. Let's see. Hillary says, I'm sorry if I've missed anyone. Also, Bilalam ends up with a blessing that Jews say every day in prayer. How beautiful are your dwelling places. Greater perfection of the soul, says iPad. And then I made a smart comment. iPad says Francis of Assisi, who came a little later, often referred to his human body as brother ass, alluding to its imperfection.
I did not know that.
In opposition to the greater.
Thank you.
Hillary says, in the story of the Jewish, and I'm sorry, I can't read that, the donkey sees God's angel and hears his direction to bless and not course the Jewish people way before Balaam figures it out. On the other hand, Balaam never deviates from his position, or he will only say what God orders. No, I'm guessing no matter how much the king Balak bribes or pressures him. A lot can be derived from that story.
Thanks,
Sorry
Hillary.
if I butchered that, Hillary.
We can get back to it in the notes and some of the stuff on follow-up.
Yeah, so you're good to go, Mike.
Thanks, Carrie. And thank you for those comments. All right, moving on to the third of the obscurity samplers. Okay, gargoyles and grotesques. Which is which? Well, over here on the left, you have a gargoyle. Over here on the right, you have a grotesque. What's the difference? A gargoyle comes from, the name comes from the Latin garga for throat. And the way folks in the Middle Ages and ever since have used gargoyles is to drain water from the roof or from the sides, from whatever, from the eaves of a building. Gargoyles show up on churches, cathedrals. They show up on government buildings in the Middle Ages as a way to drain water from these buildings and get it off of the walls. So here you see a little modern piece of metal coming from that dragon's mouth, sluicing the water off. So garga translated into gargouille in French for gargoyle. And in English, we have gargle for throat, as well as gargoyle. And over on the right, a grotesque. And the origins of this word term are Latin again, from the word grot, for meaning cave or underground cave, from which we get grotto. And the Romans apparently had artwork in their underground areas, their caves. Maybe there were wine caves, I'm not sure, but at any rate, the artwork that they did eventually became grotesques. And grotesques aren't all ugly looking. Some of them are actually quite fun. The main thing is they don't sluice water off the building. They're there more as a decorative or educational, didactic kind of thing. We're not quite sure what. Some folks have thought, they've speculated, there's been a lot of speculation on what gargoyles and grotesques might mean on cathedrals. Some folks say that they're there to ward off evil spirits. I have to wonder, how does somebody who looks kind of evil, like this guy on the right, ward off something that's evil? You know, if you'd think they'd kind of get together and have fun together, do more evil things. So I'm not sure about that theory. Others say that there's this juxtaposition of the material, the secular world on the outside and the spiritual world on the inside, and how the two kind of complement one another or are different from one another. So there are a lot of theories about this. And I have one of my own that's kind of my favorite, and that's the one that we're going to look in at here.
So Mike, can I interrupt for a quick question and a comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I keep interrupting you. So Jerry and Ruth want to know, are these often tied to flying buttresses?
No, not necessarily. I haven't seen, they're not a chart. They they appear like the one on the left at kind of a break line in the roof, at the lower level, and then the rest of the building going up. This is like on the top of one of the porches. The one on the right is at a junction point between two windows. And you'll see that they kind of show up in interesting places along the way and not necessarily on the flying buttresses, although they could very well be there at other places. I don't recall that I've seen them there at Chartres on the buttresses.
And Mike, Stephen Abramo wants to offer La Garganta, which is Spanish for throat.
There you go.
The more
So,
you know.
Garga, Latin garga, went in a lot of directions. Gargui for I think for throat in French, garganta in Italian. I suspect there's a similar word in Catalan. There's probably another similar word in the other Romance languages that come from that Latin root. So thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Ruth and Jerry. Okay, let's move on. We're just going to do a little sampler of them. Faces in the crowd. One looking quite bewildered, one looking absolutely pained.
And those are both grotesque.
These are both grotesques, not gargoyles, but grotesques. Look out below. Here come the monsters. This is on one of the towers, and you see kind of this growling, I don't know, dragon kind of guy. There are a lot of little monsters here. One here. There's another pained face on the Capitol here. There's another like little frog-like animal here. There's maybe a bovine animal here, can't quite tell.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what this one is, but they're all over the place. I can't stress enough how important it is to take binoculars to Chartres if you want to see these things up above all of the religious art, you know, the stuff that people are usually looking at and interpreting in iconographical terms, you know, that we have Mary and Jesus seated as the seat of wisdom, all of that. That's all at the lower levels, much easier to see, much easier to access. This stuff is fun, a lot of fun, but you need binoculars to really do it justice. Okay, here's a Green Man trio. These guys are all, you know, with their foliage heads. Here's one with grapes or something coming out of its mouth. Another one over here with leaves coming out of its mouth. Very similar to the green men that you find in cathedrals and other places in England. And there's, I think, a reason for that. Is there a Celtic connection? Well, I happen to think that there is. The Celts extended all across Europe well, at the time of Rome and before. Around 300 BCE, the Celts extended from Ireland in the west to Turkey in the east. The Celts were a dreaded foe of the Romans, in part because they invaded and sacked Rome at one point. I'll get into that a little bit more as we go along here. But a couple things to mention. One is that the Celts got their name from the Greeks. They called them the Keltoi. The Romans called them the Gallii, or from which we get Gaul, which was another name for France. And for those of you who, you know, think about how all of this plays out biblically and otherwise, some of the groups, the Celtic groups, are known now by the names of their countries. The Belgi gave their name to Belgium, the Brittani to Britain, the Gaels to the Gaelic language spoken in Ireland. The Galicians were in northern Spain. The Galatians were in Turkey, and these are the same Galatians, the Christians among them, who St. Paul wrote that famous letter, the letter to the Galatians. So all of them were related as Celtic groups, speaking Celtic languages. Chartres was originally a Celtic settlement. The Romans called it at one point Carnutum. And the Carnutes, one of the tribes in Gaul, and said also to be one of the tribes that assisted in that invasion of Italy in 280 BCE range, were also called the Horned Ones. Well, interesting, because a lot of their grotesques show horned images. Here, a man apparently with horns. Here, a guy, I think, with mustache and horns. And the Celts were known to wear mustaches, unlike the Romans. Now, another little Celtic thing. They liked dogs. And here you see one of the gargoyles at Chartres with its trough. This is where the water would come down and through the mouth of the dog. And I think this is a dog on the right. I can't quite tell. It looks like a little something canine. But anyhow, the Celts believed that the saliva from dogs had healing properties. So the dogs were a sacred animal for the Celts. And is that why they're here at Chartres? We don't know, because the Celts didn't have a written language. All we know about them is what we've learned from the Romans and their other opponents. Celts were also known as great horse riders. They were fierce warriors on their horses, and the Romans really did dread them and feared their feared their military prowess. That's why Julius Caesar, in around 50, came to Gaul, to France, and basically led a conquering expedition. It was one of the first things I learned in my Latin class from Caesar's book about the conquest of Gaul, where he starts out with, all Gaul is divided into 3 parts. So it goes back a long ways for me too. But at any rate, the horse also was an important animal for the Celts. And then one of the grotesques, some grotesques underneath the gargoyle, show a ram on the right, I think a lion, and a sheep or ewe on the left. These 2 animals were sacred to the Celts. And the ram shows up in images of one of its important gods. Who's that? His name is Cernunnos. And we know that only because there's a stela, a vertical stone that's now at the Cluny Museum in Paris, that has on one side the Roman gods and on the other side the Celtic gods. And Cernunnos is among them. So we know a little bit from this juxtaposition of the hierarchy of gods for the Romans and the Celts. But at any rate, look a little closer. It's kind of a blurred image. It's from a snip, but here you have the horns again. And why is this important in terms of Celtic history, or what we can figure out of Celtic history? It's because this image connects across national lines. Here's Cernunnos at Canterbury Cathedral across the English Channel. The horns and foliage. Cernunnos was thought of as a fertility god. So you would see him with foliage coming out of his mouth, like you see here, and also in this capital at Chartres. I might mention that this capital, I forgot to say, comes from the predecessor cathedral to the one that we have now, the one that was lost, or much of it lost, in the fire of 1194. So that cathedral seemed to have more of these Celtic images embedded in it. And this is one of the things that's now in Chartres' basement. I took a tour of the crypt with a French-speaking guide, caught very little of it, but one of the things that I was able to ask him at the end of the tour was about this. I could speak that much French, and ask him if there were any more images like this in the cathedral. And there are still a few near the west facade. They look like images that reflect some kind of historic battle that the Celts had with somebody or another, and we don't know what it means. So anyhow, moving on, you can see Cernunnos at Canterbury Cathedral. You can see Cernunnos in the choir at Barcelona. You have foliage extending from his groins in both directions, going all over the place. Here are his horns. And lo and behold, you can even see him in the United States.
Oh.
This is in New York City at Riverside Church. A very early image of Cernunnos on a silver cauldron shows him with ram's horn head holding a snake with a ram's head also. This one doesn't have it. But what's going on with the symbolism here? Well, the ram was thought to be a symbol of virility, fertility, productivity. The snake, a symbol of regeneration because it sheds its skin and it grows and is reborn. So those two ideas about divinity and sacredness were there in Celtic religion from way back. And remarkably, some of these images carried on here, even into the United States. But I'll also note that Cernunnos became a model for images of Satan and the devil because of the horns, and I don't know what else, maybe the association with a snake. But there's another kind of mystery in all of this. How did Cernunnos go from being a fertility god to being a model for the epitome or personification of evil?
Looks like he has wings.
And it does here, he has wings, so fallen angel kind of thing.
And fangs.
And he has fangs, yeah. That would not have appeared in Celtic images of, Merce was just
Roman
saying that he
hooves,
has fangs.
too.
That wouldn't be there in the Celtic images of Cernunnos. So at
So
any
Mike, can I interject a few comments in the chat?
Yep.
Okay, so Craig offers a little while ago, actually, there are many green men on the late 19th and early 20th century buildings in my neighborhood in NYC. Stephen offers what I think we're all thinking. I'm going to get nightmares from these horned gods and grotesques. And Jerry and Ruth chime in, so much synchronism as pagan rituals drawn into emergence, Christian ones. Martha wants to know, what are all these Celtic symbols doing on a cathedral? Were they folk survivals of Celtic culture that the carvers, oopsies, just liked as decoration? Or had these symbols been tied into Christian symbology somehow?
Okay. I'll go to Martha's question. I'm going to get to it. Martha, your question leads to my next slide.
Okay.
Can
I offer one more thing before you go there? Jerry and Ruth offer that Sarah, who we all remember and whose memory is a blessing, senior thesis was on synchronism of Celtic beliefs and rituals with the Catholic religion that took root.
I would love to see that.
Gosh.
Send it my way. Thanks, Jerry and Ruth. Yeah, there's a lot of syncretism, the adoption of images, pulling things in from other cultures. You think about, well, for a very basic symbols that I'm interested in, circles and squares. Circles and squares didn't start out as Christian symbols. These things predate Christianity by millennia. The Greeks thought of the sky as a dome. The Hebrews thought of it as a dome. And the idea that, it's a circular space beyond which God exists, or beyond which, is the realm of God, goes way, way back. The idea of a square as a symbol of the earth goes back at least as far as the Greeks, to Aristotle in the 300s, and probably to Empedocles 100 years or more before him. And who knows if others have done it? I don't know myself, but I suspect that square, 4 corners of the earth, 4 winds, all of that, 4 directions, is something that folks symbolized in their art long time ago. So a lot of this stuff has been adopted by Christianity and by other faiths that have carried with us. So one of the things I find most fascinating about all of this stuff at Chartres is that it's really kind of this link between way back and today. I mean, we can still see a little bit here about how things have been passed along, what they thought was important or not. And that's why it's so significant as a place for visiting, for learning, and so forth. It's just such a, Rick has called it a little time capsule. It is that. It captures a lot about the time in the 1200s, you know, that things that were important to them. But it also transmits things from an earlier time to us today through some of the symbolisms that there and some of the unanswered questions about why is this stuff there. So Martha, to your question about why is this stuff on a Christian cathedral? Well, here's something that two historians have said. Others who have studied this stuff have picked up on it too. But I like this metaphor of the lumber room. So I'll just read this excerpt from their book. The church in medieval times had come to be the storehouse of the subconscious of the people. The lumber room, as it were, in which were bygone, ancient, half-forgotten, and half-formulated beliefs and superstitions, customs, and folklore. The authorities would seem to have been remarkably tolerant of these, and by countenancing such bric-a-brac, the church has effectively preserved to an astonishing degree a great deal of our ancient past, particularly Celtic past, where we don't have anything written about, you know, what they believed or what all of this stuff means. So it's open for speculation. It's a lot of fun to do. But I like this idea about the lumber room. And basically, if we were talking about this today, we'd say, you know, that the church has kind of become, you know, with all of this stuff from way back when that we don't understand anymore, sort of a storage bin, you know, for things that like this are very interesting, very important to somebody, but forgotten for us in terms of what they really meant. Okay, so I want to go back to this one. Here at Chartres, this image of the ram, why is it there? Were they thinking, you know, did the church people want these things included? We don't know. Were the artists given free rein to sculpt kind of the things that they wanted to and carry on their Celtic tradition? I don't know. The artist didn't write it down. But all of these things are wonderful and delightful questions to contemplate. They could be that. They could be just decorative. They could be somebody's major effort to pass on something of his or her cultural tradition. I can say from my visit to Chartres in 2019, fall of 2019, that the Celtic identity there was a surprise to me, that people identify with the Celts as much as they do. I went to a cathedral town called Sens, S-E-N-S. It was the settlement of the Celtic tribe called the Senon, S-C-N-N-O-N-E-S. Their leader in the 200s, 300s before Christ was a warrior named Bern-Klug. Well, in Sens, in that town, on the top of its tallest building is a golden image of Bern-Klug, the Celtic guy who invaded and sacked Rome. There are images throughout Sens of Bern-Klug as a sort of a little pilgrimage thing embedded in the sidewalks to take you from one historic spot to another. So the folks in Sens very much identify with their Celtic past, dating all the way back hundreds of years before Christ, when the Celts were still beating Rome. So go figure. I was fascinated and am still fascinated by all of this. So at any rate, I have no answers, but a lot of questions, and I hope some of the questions folks will take along with them and explore a little bit themselves. So to close this, we'll take some more questions and stuff in a moment, but I just want to say that these things are kind of in the works. When Merce and I talked about this particular talk, Obscure Chart, and I started saying, oh, I'd like to talk about this, and I'd like to talk about that, I like to talk about this and that, and then the other. She said, hold on. I don't think you're going to be able to fit it all into an hour and a half, and probably not into 3 hours. So think about breaking it up and maybe doing one more if you have the energy and ability to do it. So one of the obscure chart stories is something that happened in World War II. And it's obscure only because we didn't figure it out until late, what had really happened. And Paul Schultz, Dominique, and Dave Schultz and I are going to collaborate, I think, and I hope sometime around Veterans Day, on a talk about Chartres Cathedral in World War II and how Paul and Dave's dad plays into all of this. We had the pleasure to meet him a few years ago, and Merce, Core, and I met him, his name's Gene, and his wife Eleanor at their place in Milwaukee, and had a delightful time, learned oodles from them. They were just so open and welcoming, and I really want to honor his memory. He died earlier this year with a talk about Chartres in World War II with the help of the folks who really know the story a heck of a lot better than I do. So that's one thing in the works. We'll let you know. Paul, Dave, Dominique, and I still need to work out the timing on it. I also want to build a reading and reference list, including Rick's articles, some stuff from my blog, and then also to share the essay on my theory about circles and squares. So that's where we're headed. I'm playing it by ear, you know, in terms, I'm feeling fine now. I'm still enjoying the research. I'm still enjoying putting these things together. They feel more like an uplift than a burden to me by all means. I'm so energized by this stuff, and it's kind of kept me going through these last several months. So at any rate, that's what I'm thinking. If you can join us.
To stop share so that you can see people.
And I'm going to say thank you in various languages.